Hello everybody, this is Refresh and I'm here to recap my draft experience for Corsa 2020 this last weekend. I attended draft weekend on Saturday, July 13th, and these are all the cards that I drafted. The top row are my picks in order from first to last, from right to left, and then the second row is the second pack, and the third row is the third pack. So as you can see from looking at the first pack, I took Rotting Regisaur first, and then I took Chandra, and then I kind of just went deep down the red path for most of the first pack just because I got Chandra, Shock, Chandra's Outrage, and a bunch of decent cards all the way down the line. I wasn't committed to black. Rotting Regisaur and the eventual War Chief did help me to consider black as a good option, but I didn't commit to it. In the second pack, my first pick was actually a card that I just took because of its intense value as a foil Leyline of the Void, which is perhaps one of the most valuable cards in the set. And then the Audacious Thief helped make me feel a little bit more inclined towards black, and the second Chandra's Outrage really pushed me towards staying in red. And so I kind of went down that way, and the red never really dried up. A lot of my picks were pretty good. Going into the second pack, there was a lot more good black being passed towards me, and that's because I later discovered that the person on my right was actually also in black. Third pack, again, was much more red focused, and I got a bunch of decent cards. I think the overall set of picks was very heavy on burn options, especially as removal, and so I was pretty happy with everything that I drafted. And from that, this is the deck that I ended up building. As you can see, there are no 6-drops here, and there is a ton of burn. In fact, the majority of my spells in the bottom part of this layout, as you can see, are spells that can be used to kill creatures or direct damage towards the face, in the case of Shock and Chandra, Novice Pyromancer, who I mostly consider a double shock, and then potentially giving my Lavakin Brawlers and Fire Elemental a little bit of additional damage potential on each turn. But her flexibility makes her an excellent magic card. And then 3 Chandra's Outrages to push, to remove blockers, and then push more damage. And then you have something resembling an aggressive deck here. The Uncaged Fury is a way to have Ursat's removal, but it's also a way, if your opponent leaves one of your attacking creatures unblocked, to really get in and finish the game as well because of the pump plus double strike. In terms of creatures, and I'm going to count Mask of Immolation as a creature, the 2-drops are a little bit lighter, but I did pick some pretty good ones in terms of Blood Burglar. Pack Mastiff actually turned out to be a little better than I expected because the threat of pumping made it better, and Sorcerer of the Fang was a way for me, if the board would stall out, to get in the last points of damage to win. But the idea is that this is a very aggressive deck. We get in quickly and we go hard, and that's why Rotting Regisaur sort of tied the deck together in the sense that it is a card that you play early and you just smash as hard as you can with it and do as much damage before your opponent will eventually direct removal towards it. Or if they must, they can multi-block it, in which case you end up with a bit of card advantage to counteract the fact that you're discarding a card every turn to it on your upkeep. Now, I actually never had to discard a card to it on my upkeep because my opponents would just kill it outright and spend a murder on it. And that would lead the way for cards like the Audacious Thief to get in and draw me cards as well. And the really good combo that is in this deck is actually the Goblin Smuggler, which you can tap to give a creature power 2 or less unblockable. And that works really well for multiple cards in my deck, including the Blood Burglar, the Pack Mastiff, which the Blood Burglar will get you free life on a hit. The Pack Mastiff can get pumped after it attacks. The Lavakin Brawlers similarly can get pumped after they attack as well. And the Audacious Thieves, if you smuggle them, will get you a card at the cost of 1 life as well every turn. And so the Goblin Smuggler really works well with a lot of the cards in the black and red deck. And so it's a card that you should keep an eye out for if you are playing with some of these other 2-power creatures that are around. At the top of the curve, I just have some big beefy guys in case I need them. And then that is the basic deck. I decided to put an Evolving Wilds in just to help deal with the fact that I need some double reds, but the fact that I only have a minimum of black cards in the deck, it makes me need a little bit more potential to get swamps or mountains as needed. And I don't think it would slow down the deck too much to have it in there, so I put it in there instead of just running mono basic lands. So how did I do? Well, in game 1, I played against a mono red player who I assumed in the first game that he was just having mana troubles and was struggling to get his second color, but it turns out that I was just outpacing him so quickly and removing his threats with Chandra's Outrages and Reduced Dashes and everything, such that he wasn't really able to make much stick on the board, and so I kind of just overran him, especially once I was able to get out the Little Chandra and take out a couple more of his creatures. That is the first game. After the first game, I realized that the Mask of Immolation is not as good as I'd hoped that it would be. Creating a 1/1 that can sack and then give all of your other creatures the ability to sack to do damage is decent, but it's also not really that impressive of a threat, and so I went back in and replaced the card with a Flame Sweep for a way to potentially get a 2-for-1. Now this is a dangerous card for my deck because I have a lot of creatures that only have 2 toughness. And so it's a card that I would only put in conditionally depending on the type of deck that I'm playing, but my opponent did have a lot of 2 toughness creatures, and so I thought that if I played well, I would be able to get a bit of card advantage from Flame Sweep. And I have a couple cards that survive Flame Sweep, especially in terms of the 4-drops and above, if I use Flame Sweep on my turn. Now, for the second game, my opponent flooded pretty hard, and I took advantage of it by removing his creatures and turning and swinging, and so my opponent really never got a chance with me, and so that was the first set of games. In the second game, I went up against the player that was directly on my right, and he was taking all the really good black cards, so he had 4 Audacious Thieves and 3 Murders in his deck, I believe, and that made it quite a bit of a tough game. We started with my opponent being on the play, and in the first game, my opponent just started off much better than me. He removed my threats, and towards the mid game, I was able to get a little bit of ground, but I stalled out on mana a little bit, stuck at 4, and so I wasn't able to get a lot of flexibility with the cards in my hand, and consequently, my opponent getting a little bit more mana and being able to play a few more cards was able to run away with the game once I started stalling on my land playing. That was first. My opponent was playing a Dimir deck, and in our second game, I started with a mulligan to 6, but I started also with a Blood Burglar attacking on the first turn, and my opponent didn't have any good plays early on, and so I gained a lot of life and did a lot of damage, and by the time that my opponent was able to stabilize a little, I had a handful of removal targeted towards his creatures and just kept chunking in with damage that was primarily from smaller creatures, but there was enough of it that my opponent wasn't able to do much about it, especially since the cards that he was drawing didn't do much to counteract what I was able to play. And so I took the second game. For the third game, I flooded really hard. I kept a 3-lander and proceeded to draw the vast majority of my lands in my deck. At one point, I think I drew 6 lands in a row. And so there wasn't really much I could do except, play the land and hope that the next thing that I draw would get me somewhere. But by the time that I was able to play any creatures, they were pretty much left on chump duty, or my opponent would murder them instantaneously if they were at all a threat. And so I lost that one, and that took me out of running for the first place marker, but I was hoping that I would be able to at least get to 2 wins on the third match. My third match was against another Dimir player. Seems to be a popular color combination. In the first game, I opened with a mulligan to 6 with a 1-line hand in the very first hand, and then the second hand had 2 mountains, no swamps, and I didn't feel like it would be wise to go to 5 at this point because my opponent kept his first hand, and so I just went with it. And that turned out to be a bit of a disaster for me because I actually didn't draw a swamp until I was almost dead, and I just kept drawing my black cards, despite the fact that I had more red cards. And so, because of that, I spent most of the game not doing much of anything except for playing the 2 red spells that I originally had, and then losing a ton of life as a result of one of them getting locked down by my opponent's sleep paralysis and not being able to win the race, and my opponent having a comfortable lead on me. By the time I was able to play cards, I was taken out of the game. In the second game, I took another mulligan to 6 off of a 1-lander and kept a hand that had a black and a red mana source. And so, at the very least, I was able to play the different colors that I had. And my opponent had a bit of a slow start, and so I started chipping in pretty quickly with a handful of creatures, and my opponent took quite a bit of damage, and by the time that he was able to cast spells, he was just stuck on removing my creatures and or chumping, and I took that incremental advantage for the win. In our last game, I think that it was a pretty solid game, despite the fact that I started with a mulligan again, taking me to a mulligan in every single game of this match while my opponent didn't take a single mulligan, and kept a 2-lander with just 2 mountains. It was risky, but all the spells in my hand were red, and so I felt that it would be okay regardless, and so I went with that. And then the game started off with me dropping a Blood Burglar on the first turn and getting a 1 swing with it before we started to have our board get a little bit crazy with a lot of spells and creatures. But at some point my opponent started to draw more lands than me, and you know how that's basically how Magic goes in Limited. Once one opponent starts to flood out, the other opponent can take an advantage and keep casting spells and doing damage, and so that's what I did, and I ended up winning that game. And so with that, I went 2-1, and for my efforts at Emerald Knights, they give you 1 pack of the set per win, and so I got 2 packs of Core Set 2020. But this, the foil Line of the Void, kind of made the draft worthwhile regardless, just because of how valuable this card is. And so I consider myself a winner just in the draft alone, and then I came out with a 2-1, a couple packs of Magic. I didn't get any of the promo cards, and I actually felt that the Core Set 2020 draft format was actually pretty fun. I really enjoyed the set of cards that are available to you and some of the synergies that are available within at least black and red as far as I've experienced so far. You can make some pretty good decks, and there are some really strong commons that help make this set feel really good, even if you're just playing mostly commons. And as you can see, the only rare I have in my deck is the Rotting Registrar, and that didn't even feel bad. Like, I thought this deck worked really well thanks to all of the removal options that it had and the little synergies I have within the creature set here. It is kind of sad that there are no dedicated promo cards for these experiences anymore, but Wizards of the Coast does offer this new promo pack thing, and so I'll take a picture of the cards that opened up in the promo pack that was offered to my pod. For Emerald Knights, they would open up the promo pack for the pod, and then the top first and second place would draft their choice of card from this set of 4 cards in this particular case, and then the store would randomly give away the last remaining 2 cards. So let me know how your drafts went in the comments below, and what you thought of my picks and the deck that I built. Hit like if you enjoyed the video, hit subscribe if you'd like to see more such videos. This is Refresh, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.